let's see. There we go. Okay, so before Elisabeth begins, I just want to remind everybody that nobody here is a doctor and no one is providing any medical advice. Elisabeth is here to share her personal experience with all of us, so please direct any medical questions to your own providers. But once again, we are grateful to have Elisabeth here with us today. As I said already, she comes to us from Growing Independent Eaters and is going to share her experience and expertise about the world of feeding therapy and tube weaning. She is a mom herself and entered into the realm of feeding therapy with her youngest daughter to overcome some feeding challenges, and she now helps families navigate some more complex feeding needs in their own homes. So, all right, Elisabeth, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I have been with Growing Independent Eaters since 2016. So I've been there with them for a hot minute, having walked with, hundreds of thousands of families through the tube feeding, tube weaning, post-tube life, having done it, of course, with my own kiddo, who is now 8 and thriving. She did not have an omphalocele, had some other diagnoses, including aspiration that I heard one of you talk about. So, and I'm happy to go into more of her experience and mine if that's ever helpful, but I want to just share a little bit about who we are at GIE. I've put my information and our email address and website here on this first slide so that anybody who would like it is more than welcome to reach out to us. And then when at the end of kind of my little talk, we did put together a discount for anyone who has joined us today or who listens to this recording later, as we do want to just make access to tube support, to weaning support and post-tube support as accessible as we possibly can. I don't know if any of you have heard of us at GIE, so I figured I would just give kind of a brief introduction to who we are and what we do and how long we've been around and all of that. So our primary philosophy centers around one core concept, and that is family. We believe every family has a culture of eating in their homes. And we believe that it does not matter what a child will do for some clinician and some clinics somewhere else. If parents do not feel empowered to know what to do at home and kids don't feel happy and safe to participate in eating in the place where all the eating takes place, which is at the home. So our program and our process is designed very intentionally to be in home, where we support you day to day on helping your child learn how to eat and helping you as a parent feel empowered to know, what do I offer my kiddo? How often do I offer? How do I know that they're safe? How do we know it's effective? And all of that. So we really are intentionally a sort of virtually supportive program because we want you to feel safe and capable in working and weaning your kiddo at home with our help and support. So we center on bringing everybody to the family table: parents, grandparents, siblings, nannies, nurses, and of course the tube weaning kiddo themselves. So that is a really core philosophy of everything that we do. We offer kind of 3 lanes of support to families depending on where you're at in the journey. We have a pre-wean program that helps families and kiddos who are still on tube feeds and it may not be safe or quite ready to wean from feeding tubes or tube feeds at the time. But those families may be in a number of situations, whether it's kiddo isn't gaining weight, tube feeds aren't tolerated well, there's significant vomiting, chronic issues or whatnot. And so the pre-wean program is designed to help support families. Actually, that just reminded me of something else, to help support families as they are making their way towards being safe and able to wean. That also includes, we have a whole program designed for families who are wanting to transition to blended tube feeds as opposed to using an enteral formula. And so we have a dietitian who is able to help you make that transition safely and successfully if that's something that is safe and ready for your kiddo. We also offer tube weaning. I think that's the majority really of what we do is work with families who are weaning from feed tubes. And the goal then is really to work with families and parents and caregivers to help them wean their kiddo safely at home. And then our last lane, we call our Happy Eaters program. Happy Eaters is designed for kiddos who are no longer on tube feeds or who never were on tube feeds, but are for some reason stuck in their eating and things are just not really going well. We work with them to help eating kind of come on board and work successfully for their kiddos. So kind of 3 lanes and lots of options in between. We have a lactation consultant and lactation on our team. We have blended tube feeds. There's really quite a lot within those 3 umbrellas, but by and large, those are kind of our 3 areas of focus. We take a very interdisciplinary approach to tube feeding and tube weaning. Every single plan that we write for a family is personalized and tailored to the needs of that child. So while we have 3 foundational principles that everything we suggest is based on, we really do write everybody's plan from scratch so that we can meet the needs of your kiddo and your family. The 3 principles we sort of we don't sort of prioritize, we do prioritize them. It centers on safely introducing appetite. Appetite is the body's system that helps to fuel and motivate eating. And we do not expect fully tube-fed children to eat or drink anything of any volume at all on top of full tube feeds. We believe that kids learn to eat by eating and that they only have the motivation to learn that when we can safely wake up that system within their bodies to help them learn how to eat. So if you have a kiddo who isn't eating yet and they're on full tube feeds, that's a good thing. We should all stop eating when we're full all the time. And so we do not require kids to be eating or have eating skills prior to weaning. We believe that comes with weaning and the safe introduction of appetite. So while we know that weaning isn't really successful often without appetite involved, we also know appetite doesn't do its job if it's not coupled with meal times being regular, consistent, respectful, and responsive. So we really work with parents to demedicalize the eating process because tube feeds are a medical process, but eating is not a medical process. And so how do we, as parents, demedicalize the way that we are looking at our kiddos and offering meals and considering what they eat and didn't eat so that we can respond in respectful ways, in ways that allow them to learn and grow rather than that turn us as parents into just human feeding tubes. So appetite and respectful, we call it division of responsibility, always work together to help bring eating on board. And then our 3rd principle is that we're very child-led. The one thing that never shows up in anyone's plan is how long they should stay at each step. We make a plan towards tube weaning, and then we work with you and we listen to you and we listen to what your child is doing and we respond with going backwards and forwards and making adjustments based on what your kiddo is telling us. So kids are always, I think, do better when they know that they are heard and part of a process as well. So taking those principles, we then work with each family individually to kind of tailor a program around where their kiddo is at and what we believe is safe and developmentally appropriate for them. The interdisciplinary team is a really important concept to us because we recognize that there's no one specialty that has, all of the information that a family might need. So everybody who works with us has access to 4 specialists, one of whom is a licensed feeding therapist, a registered dietitian, a parent coach like me, and a mental health counselor or social worker, depending on that person's particular specialty. And we all work together looking at your kiddo and your family from different perspectives and angles so that when we're giving recommendations, we can talk about skills and swallow safety and nipple flow and what cup to pick. We can talk about nutritional gaps that you might be worried about. We can talk about growth, pre-wean, during the wean, and post-wean. We can talk about how meal times look and feel in your home and in your family, and we can care for you because you have all been through some medical trauma, prolonged medical trauma for a really, really long time. And you as parents are just as worthy of care and support and healing as your child is. It's just that now you're the adult, so you have to give it to yourself because there's, you're the parent this time. So we want to make sure that your whole family has good support and that everything, that we're kind of covering all those gaps and bases. Something I might not think of, the feeding therapist might. Something the dietitian doesn't think of, I might. And so we all work together as a team to support you. So how successful are we? This is a big question we get all the time. We've weaned a huge number of children with a huge range of medical complexities. We don't track by syndrome or diagnoses just because there are too many of them to track. But we have worked with kiddos who with seriously wide ranges of complex issues like renal failure, heart kiddos, many developmental diagnoses like autism or genetic diagnoses like Down syndrome or Kabuki syndrome. We work with kids who are incredibly premature. I think the most premature I've worked with is a 23-weeker. Shoot, they were born at 23 weeks. GI complexities like omphalocele, dysphagia, and so many more, including kids who we never ever find out why they ever needed a feeding tube to begin with. We published our pilot study last summer, and longitudinal study is underway. So we have worked with our method for a really long time. We've published it with really, really successful results. And I can tell you a bit about that pilot study. While we've weaned thousands of families in the pilot, we just focused on 31 of them because that's what pilots are. They're just small groups. None of the participants were eating or drinking before weaning, and the focus was to wean them either fully or partially off their tube support. The kiddos who none of these particular kiddos weaned partially, they all weaned fully, but we do work with kids who maybe are only able to wean partially as well. We found that infants wean much faster than kiddos in the preschool, toddler, and beyond age ranges. That's pretty typical because they have fewer opinions about life and their days are not ruined by having to wear the red shirt instead of the orange shirt. So infants tend to wean much quicker, or much more straightforwardly is probably a better way of putting it, than kiddos who are older, which does not mean the older kiddos are harder. It just means they're different, and different is just fine. We do expect weaning to bring a bit of weight loss. And so you can see kind of the average there of what we saw in terms of how much weight they lost. And then we follow every family post-wean to make sure that that growth is reestablished and headed in the right way. And we saw 93% of those participants surpassing their pre-wean weight by 6 months. And the percentage that wasn't, we were able to adjust and work so that they were back on track well within that time period. So we're just able to sort of document what we already knew, is that we actually found that weaning at home was just as successful, sometimes in some cases more successful, than programs that were more expensive or done inpatient. So I want to go into any questions that you have about what we do, and I'm happy, Melissa, maybe you can give me some guidance here. I don't know if it would be helpful for me to just sort of guess some of the general questions that I tend to get asked and just answer them while we're still recording, or if we should wait on that. Do you have a feeling?
Yeah, I think if there's questions that you typically get, or common questions, I think let's go ahead and maybe address some of those, and then we can get to specifics.
Okay, perfect. So I think some of the most common question that I get asked, or all of our team get asked, is how do I know if my kiddo is ready to wean, and how do we evaluate if a child is ready to wean safely or could wean safely on our method? So we evaluate that by asking parents to fill out a really, really detailed intake form, which you can find at our website. And I'll send this, Melissa, I'll send you this presentation and the discount code to you later, just in case people are driving and not able to write it down, but I'll put our website and stuff back up for right now. We ask families to fill out a really detailed intake form that just tells us everything you possibly can about your kiddo and where they've been and where they are now. And then our team looks at that, dietitian, myself, feeding therapist, we look at that and we look for some specific hallmarks in particular. We want to make sure that your kiddo is growing successfully on tube feeds. And if they aren't, we want to help you make sure they're growing successfully on tube feeds prior to weaning. We look for things, we check to make sure that there aren't going to be any major surgeries that are coming up really quickly. So if you have a kiddo who's having surgery next month, might not be the right time to wean until after surgery is completed. Usually, if there's a surgery within about a 6-month window, we will talk about that and see what kind of surgery or procedure it is, and then decide from there if we think weaning would be within that time frame would be safe, or if we should wait until after surgery. So that's, again, all really specific to what you guys are going through. We look to see if your kiddo either has a safe swallow, that someone on your team, whether it's through a swallow study or not, through clinical observation, if someone on your team believes your child can swallow safely, either on thin liquids or thickened liquids. Lots of kids wean to thickened liquids. My kiddo weaned to thickened liquids. Or if that's not possible because your kiddo just isn't eating enough for us to know to evaluate the swallow, we want to know that too, because often then we look at weaning enough in order to evaluate that swallow. We believe kids should be given a chance to show us what they can do and for us to make those adjustments as we go if we start to worry about that swallow. So we want to know everything we can about that swallow, who's evaluated it, in what ways, what the results were, or if that evaluation wasn't possible because your kiddo isn't eating or drinking enough. We want to see that there's some sort of offering of food happening already, even though we believe your child should not be eating or drinking any of that. If they are, that's great, but we don't require oral intake, oral volumes, any eating or drinking at all before tube weaning. We just hope that at some point during a day, even if it's just one time, that they're at least getting the opportunity to encounter the food or drink that's developmentally appropriate for them. We look to see how you guys are doing. If you're still in NICU, if you're just home from the NICU, if things are happening, we look to see how you guys are doing and feeling so that we can, again, meet you where you are. And we look at sort of what your hopes are for your kiddo and make sure that that's something that we can guarantee. If you have a 4-month-old, for example, and you want to wean them to just solid food and water, we probably wouldn't be the right program for you because we don't believe 4-month-old could wean to solids and water. We're going to look at weaning to a bottle, for example. So we want to make sure that what we do lines up with what you're hoping for. And then, of course, if we see an intake and there are things that we aren't sure about or we want to clarify, we just ask. We ask those questions and ask you to tell us a little bit more. And given that, we give one of 3 answers, which is, yay, we're excited. Yes, sounds great. We'd love to work with you. The second answer could be, yay, we'd love to work with you, and we just want to make sure your kiddo is through surgery, or there's some sort of thing we need to wait on before we can. Or the third answer, which is not super common, but it does happen, which is we don't think we would be the right program for you, or we don't think your kiddo is safe to wean at this time. Here's why. Here's what we think we would want to see in order to do that, and here's where we think you could do all of that. So if we think your kiddo needs to finish surgery, that's one thing. If we think if there's been like a long history of not growing or losing weight, we'd want you to either work with us or your local team to reestablish growth. There's lots of other things that could be. But we do that through an intake form, and we ask that to fill that out. Probably the other question I get the most is, how much does my kiddo need to be eating in order to wean successfully? And so I thought I'd talk about that just really quickly before we answer anyone else's questions. And I mentioned it before, but I just want to drive home, your child does not need to be eating orally already in order to be a safe candidate for weaning. And the reason for that is because kiddos whose appetite systems are fully satiated with tube feeds, there is no intrinsic need or motivation to eat. Beyond that, though, a lot of kiddos struggle to tolerate tube feeds. Maybe there's chronic vomiting, significant reflux, constipation, lots of things that come into play that make that satiated appetite even more complicated. If we were vomiting multiple times a day, we probably wouldn't be eating either. So there's a lot of reasons that come into play beyond that. But probably the primary worry I hear from parents has to do with skill. Well, how can my kiddo wean if we don't know that they have the skills to eat successfully? And that is a really good question. And usually my answer to that is, we don't make kids outside of the tube feed population. We do not make kids prove to us that they have eating skills before we let them eat. When babies are born under typical situations, which not all of us have had, we don't make them show up. We don't pop tubes in them to make them show us their skills before we let them work it out. We just sort of let them work it out. And the vast majority of kids are able to learn those skills even if they have never used them before. So tube feeds in a lot of ways are like eating car seats, for example, where I don't expect a kid to take a kiddo out of a car seat and say, well, you'd better show me you know how to walk before I let you roll on the floor or figure out how to crawl or do all of these pre-walking skills. And in the same way, I don't expect for a kiddo to show me eating skills before we have safely and slowly and carefully begun to take them out of that car seat and let them learn all those pre-eating skills as eating develops. And so if you're worried that your kiddo isn't eating, or you're worried that your kiddo does not have any eating skills, that's okay, because the vast majority of the human race had no eating skills before we let them start to work it out. And we would be there to help support that whole process. I think those are the two most common questions I get, which is how do we know if my kiddo is ready to wean? How do we evaluate that? And what do I do if my kiddo isn't eating already? I think those are the most common questions, but I do want to, make sure that I give lots of time for people to ask the questions that they are wondering about.